Hello, everyone. I'm Chaos Cook, and welcome to another episode of CliKK Chat, where we bring you guys exclusive interviews with musicians from all around the globe. Today, we're talking with Elizabeth Faidley, a renowned pedagogue who has received numerous teaching awards and taught at some of the world's most prestigious conservatories. Today, we're focusing on practicing, auditions, and competition preparation, and how you can utilize specific strategies to maximize your practice efficiency. Don't forget to drop a like and subscribe, and I hope you guys enjoy this interview. All right, well, thank you so much for being willing to do this interview with me. First off, I just wanted to start off with a few questions about practicing tips and how we can, as musicians, most optimally practice. So first of all, after a successful lesson, there's a lot of stuff that we've learned and we can apply it, right? So what's the best way to practice after one of those lessons to make sure that we have the information that we've received ingrained into our minds?
I think the best thing to do right after your lesson is to actually practice,
Mm.
which everyone I think is like, phew, lesson is over. And then they might even take a day off, or the night certainly off. But the very best thing you can do is play, or you can take notes. And so you might have a teacher who takes notes or sends you notes, or you might have written stuff down. If you're really advanced, like chaos, you might have like written things in your music. Instead of leaving them there, type them out or write them out by hand. Or one of my favorite things to do is print another copy of your piece and rewrite everything you remember in the copy of the piece.
Mm.
So those three, like you can choose which one works best for you. I've had kids who make videos of themselves kind of going, measure 3, half bow, measure 5, make sure you started the frog, but don't have a slam bow, measure 6, you're wildly out of tune. So, and of course, this moves with your level. So that's for a very advanced, like 14 to 18. But that's I would say those three are the most helpful, because it does feel sometimes after a lesson when you get a lot of information, sometimes you're even like, I don't know where to start, or she said a bunch of things, but I'm still sort of like, but where do I start? So I would start there. The other thing that I tell all my kids is, if you don't know what to do, if you're standing in your practice room and you're like, okay, well, I'm kind of bored, mildly frustrated, and like don't think my Mendelssohn is like that much better, don't really even remember my lesson, except she yelled out frog a lot, then the best thing to do is, number one, do it very slowly for intonation. So put your metronome on like 60 and have a beat in between. So it sounds like ba, ba.
Mm.
Play every single note just so you can hear the pitch. That'll give you an overarching, how does everything sound? And then you can also really tune your ears into yourself. The second thing to do is just do a normal 3/4 speed metronome run. Just sort of go through your piece with the metronome at maybe 70 or 80%, not top speed. And then number three, the most helpful way, but also the most hated way, you can record yourself in chunks. So make your piece. So if you're playing Mendelssohn, you would play up until the triplets start. Bum, ba, 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 da, 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 right? Okay. And then you would go until the octaves, and then the octaves would be their own section. So that's how I divide up the first page of Mendelssohn.
Yeah.
You play the first part, you stop, you listen to yourself. And then it's easy these days. When I was growing up in the late 1900s, we had to use a cassette tape and rewind it and record over it. Now it's so easy. You guys all have 12 devices. So you push something and then it records you, and then you listen back, and then immediately you'll be like, oh, okay, well, that's not as in tune as I thought, or that doesn't sound like I thought, or
Yeah.
why am I not vibrating on that one note? Or I actually am not going to the frog. She was right.
Mm.
So those are my top three. If you don't know what to do, do this.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And right, yeah, of course it's a good thing to record ourselves for repertoire, but also when it comes to technique practice, should we also record that too?
Yeah. I think recording anything is good, but in technique practice, maybe instead of being overwhelmed, like in by technique practice, it could be anything. So let's say we're doing left hand virtuosi. So let's say you're playing a don't or a fiorillo or a gavinier etude. So for that, yes, that would be good for intonation. Maybe you would want to work on speed. Maybe you would want to record it to see how it's sounding.
Mhm.
And then maybe you would do it like half speed. Okay, so pretty much if it's like a big etude book, yes. But if it's a smaller exercise, like let's say you're doing something for your bow hand, let's say you're doing something for the bow hand or a vibrato practice, it's probably better just to sort of go inward and just really listen or focus. Again, this is only ages 13,
Okay.
14 up. Those I find also are helpful for even the teenagers and college students if you set a timer. So if you have a timer set for like 4 minutes, a lot of times teenagers are like, oh my gosh, okay, she wants me to do this gavinier or she wants me to play these double stops for literally forever. But even like if you do 4 minutes of the vibrato exercise or whatever your teacher wants you to do, that's so helpful. So sometimes setting timers helps too, so that you know it's ending psychologically. Even if you're the most wonderful practicer, like chaos in the world, you could still be like, okay, I know that this is only 4 minutes and it's going to end. And then when it ends, move on.
But yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and speaking of time, of course, we have to like balance between our techniques and the repertoire. So, do you think we should like set a time limit for technique and then after that just move on to repertoire? Or should we have like a goal that we want to accomplish and try to work on that?
I think that is a great question and very probably personal. Probably just it would probably be very musician to musician because I think that a lot of teenagers, so like speaking mainly of high schoolers, a lot of high schoolers have so much pressure on themselves
Yeah.
and so much on their plates. If you're going to an academic school, for example, high schools are, my students go off to Harvard and Princeton, and it's easy because their high schools have literally put them through the ringer times 12.
Mm.
And I'm sure that's like your school, or it's these days the my kids take 15 APs and have 95 tests a week. So I would say to my kids who want to be violinists, then I treat them differently from the kids who are wanting to develop as violinists but go on to, other things because
Mm.
they are going to have less of an emphasis on technical studies or technical blah blah, or I make it really small so that they don't get behind, or too if you spend too long on a piece or it causes boredom or frustration, that's pretty much the worst thing. So I sort of devise that out of what kind of student am I looking at? Like, is this a 3 hours a day student, a 45-minute a week student because she's in 95 AP classes?
Right.
So that I feel is very just student by student.
Mm. And then I've always been told that scales are like super, super important for any violinist. So, do you recommend like a certain way to practice them? And like, would you recommend all students, like music major focus or not, to work on scales daily?
Yeah, so I think that so I have three ways that I like to teach scales. But again, I do them differently for whichever student is in front of me. So right now, if you brought in three of my students, they would be doing totally different things with their scales.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
It's sort of like you have to meet the student where they are, and you cannot expect student A to do the exact same things as student B and do the same things as student C. They're different ages, they're different levels, they're in different levels in academics, they have different family lives. Like everything is so different about every student. So scales are, of course, very, very important, but you need to decide like what are you practicing scales for? Like what is the purpose of the scales? A lot of times I will see kids who switch to me and they'll come in and they'll say, "Oh, my teacher did lots of scales." And I'm like, "Okay, like show me, or what did you do?" And they pretty much just sort of run through some scales kind of quickly. And I'm like, "Okay, what are you doing?" And they're like, "Scales." And I'm like, but you have to like a point for the scale. Even more important than just intonation. Scales are about many other things. I'll give you a couple of my like secret scale practice ways. These are not mine. These are from, a lot of them are from Galamian, but so you can do the normal way, da 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 da, da that everyone does in 1, 2, 4,
Yeah.
and going up. But when you're doing those, instead of falling into a boredom coma, you can think of things like, what is my bow doing? Where am I in the bow? Is it being perfectly divided? How does my bow arm feel? And you can think about sound, so you can think about like, am I going fast? How do my fingers feel? And then you can think about sound. So those are two things in that scale. And that when we do that kind of bowings, I actually don't feel like we're really listening well enough. So for intonation, I actually break the scale into 3 octaves and do the first octave as second octave and third octaves out separately. And then do the first octave very slowly with just pitches and listening to the half steps. And you'd be really, really surprised at how out of tune everyone is. So if you take the time to listen to yourself, just play 1 octave of a scale, you're like, oh, and then it sort of like turns your brain on. But you're not going to get that if you're just playing like 3 octave scales, just like really fast. Instead, just play a 1 octave scale really slowly, and then do the middle octave, and then do the higher octave. So that's scales for intonation. Another way that I love to assign scales is to make up a fun bowing pattern, like 3, 6, 2, where you have to go do, re, mi, and then you've got 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 1, 2,
Yeah.
3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And what's cool about that is we're learning more about bow pattern, bow distribution. We're having to plan and focus because our brain can't wander away because we're focusing on that. So that also gets your bow into it and sort of serves as like a good warm up. So a lot of my students will do all of those. Probably half my students do all of those kind of scales a day,
Mhm.
but the other half don't for various reasons. From not being quite ready to not being able to have quite enough time, to me thinking that something else might be a little bit more important for him or her at that time.
Okay.
Also, I feel like a lot of teachers give too many scales too early. And what happens is, if a scale is just sort of played very fast and very out of tune, then there's really no purpose to that scale, actually. So it's just like playing a passage in Mendelssohn and being really fast and kind of out of tune. There's no, like, scales don't hold any magical powers if they are played like badly. And so I see a lot, especially on Instagram or other platforms, where teachers are like talking about scales, 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 scales. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm listening, and those are some very out of tune scales, or that scale is literally too hard for that child. Like, scales on the violin and piano were so different. On the piano, it's a part of their like initial pedagogy. For us, a D major scale requires us to go really high. So that's involving shifts. That's involving like, how does our arm come around? How does our finger move up that high? What does our thumb do? Blah, blah, blah. So I would actually rather wait and do others like G major for longer or A major for longer, and then get to those when the time is right and when it's going to be nice and in tune. So I think that is something that's really important, is that, right, there's sort of this notion that, oh, I played every scale every day. Well, you know what? If it's fast and sloppy, that doesn't mean anything. You've actually hurt yourself.
Yeah.
So I kind of feel very passionately about this. It's actually like, when people talk about scales or technique, I'm like, it has to be done right at the right level, you have to be listening in the right way, or it's simply just literally like playing Zigon, the opening on the D string and out of tune.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. And for different students, there's, as you said, you probably teach them in different ways for the repertoire. So do you think that as you suggested with scales, like separating the pieces into smaller chunks, or even just separating your practice into different sessions throughout the day, do you think that's beneficial in terms of,
Oh,
efficiency?
yeah. Yeah, that's a great idea for those who can. So if you can, like for conservatory students or students who are homeschooled, separating out your practice into like 4 45 minutes or whatever, that's ideal to give yourself your body a chance to rest and to give your brain a chance to rest and your fingers. But a lot of times, it's very hard and we cannot do that. But yes, I would love that's like my dream.
Yeah.
It's me versus the calculus teachers pretty much. So
Yeah.
I'm on the
Yeah.
losing end, sadly.
Yeah. Schoolwork is definitely a big burden on
Yeah, and
people.
I
Yeah.
think teachers have to also be aware. I talk about when I do symposiums for teachers, I talk about this a lot because I think that teachers are all around, like of all instruments, we are not aware of what teenagers are going through, and for the most part. We are in our teacherly world and we have like a thing that we want to get accomplished or whatever. Like I keep a chart for every student and it's like I want to get these things done. But what is missing from that is a full awareness of what that student is going through or what that student is doing at school, or is that student applying to high schools, or is that student's parent a psycho, or is that like there are so many things. There are tremendous social pressures, many more than there were when I was a teenager. The academic pressures on most of you, unless you've decided to become a musician, are insane. I've never seen anything like it. So you've got social, academic, you've got pressure from your parents, even if they're the best parents in the world, there's some kind of pressure. And then a lot of these really high achieving students like yourself, there's internal pressure from yourself and there comes frustration and disappointment. So I think teachers need to make sure it's very, very important that we meet the student where they are.
Right.
So our expectations have to align with where Andrea is, where Daniel is, where chaos is. So everyone is not the same, and we as teachers have to adjust ourselves. You aren't ones who need to adjust. The teachers must listen and learn and adjust.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And let's say we're talking about a scenario of a student who has a pretty heavy academic extracurricular burden. What would you suggest, for like an ideal practice routine or practice split to be?
Yeah, I mean, I have kids who are, on field hockey, riding horses, going to SAT training, and then come do 95 hours of homework. Then somehow magically there's more hours in the day. And then it's 11 and she gets out her violin, right? And she's playing like Vuitton. And I'm like, okay, so I say to those kids, do your best to get in about 30 minutes a day on the weekdays where you have school the next day. On Friday and Saturday and Sunday, those are your magical days. You need to do 2 or 3 hours if you would like to keep this momentum. If you want to slow down a little, I'm cool with that. We'll slow down a little. But if you want to keep up this momentum that you got and you're playing Vuitton and you're really doing so fantastically, then I would say pick up that violin a little bit. And then on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, we need to make up, you've got to get a little bit more in.
Yeah.
So not taking away from anything else they're doing, not making them feel bad about anything else they're doing.
Mhm.
Respect what they've chosen and their parents have chosen for them and go from there.
Right. And then let's say if there's a student who practices maybe 90 minutes at least a day, and then maybe a bit more on the weekends, do you think it's plausible for them to apply to higher level auditions or competitions?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's if you are doing 90 minutes a day and maybe a little 2 hours or 2.5 on the weekends. Yeah, I mean that's excellent. This is actually I don't have many young ones because I have mostly teenagers, but I do have a few more than I used to have. And I'm like, this is the time. Like you want to get as strong as you can before seventh grade.
Yeah,
So because then the real life starts. And so if you're really strong going into eighth grade, then you can sort of keep your momentum because you're kind of riding off of what you've already created. But
yeah,
I love for my kids to go to I love competitions just for the sake of doing them. I love recording them. I love doing recitals. I love master classes. I love special events. Anything that is getting them out of the box, happier, more involved.
yeah. That makes sense. And then when we're preparing for a competition, what do you think we should focus on the most? Like, is there anything that should take like precedence over something else? Like, for example, like musical aspect of playing versus like the technical aspect of playing?
I think that if you're preparing I'm just going to use you as an example. So if you're at your level and you have a pretty major competition in like, let's say 10 to 14 days, I think the best thing to focus on is actually intonation, is
Mm.
actually any spot that you're afraid of. I call them little monsters or those little things in Nintendo and Mario Brothers where you can squash them. I
Oh
forgot.
yeah.
Yeah. So when the Goombas come or the monsters, if you're in your head and you're playing Mendelssohn and all of a sudden you're like, and you feel it and it's coming up and you feel yourself, that you've got to put a flag there. And then you come back to it and then you practice that sucker until that monster is dead.
Mm.
And you need to just practice so painstakingly for intonation. I remember one time I was at a music festival when I was probably around your age or maybe a little bit younger. And I heard someone, the best student at the festival, and his name was Daniel, and he was backstage right before he played, and he was playing like Mozart 4. And I was like, why are you practicing it so slowly? He was like literally minutes before we went on, and he was like, bah, boom. And he was like, oh, this way I'll be in tune on stage. And I was like, okay. Like, and then not only was it in tune, it was like the most glorious and beautiful and sparkling Mozart I'd ever heard. I still remember it. And that was probably in 1996. So literally, it was his expression and his sound and everything was able to come through so clearly and so beautifully. And every note had such intention behind it. And I think it's because he had prepared it so solidly. There
Mm.
was nothing that could have gone wrong. He had prepared it so well that when he was on stage, he was able to live in the moment and he was able to enjoy it. And we could hear all of the amazing Mozart jewels just like floating in the air. I still remember it. I remember hardly any performances from the late 1900s, but I remember this one. And
Oh
I was like, oh my gosh. And that's when I started practicing like that. I was like, well, I'm going to practice like that because Daniel was freaking amazing. So
yeah.
that I think is the best way to get ready for a competition is to practice insanely carefully so that when you're in the zone, you can let go and trust
Mm.
yourself.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then just one final question. Of course, if we've prepared to the best of our ability, when we're actually on stage, a lot of students still do feel the pressure. So do you
Yeah.
do you think that we should like focus on like a specific aspect of our playing when we're actually performing, like maybe trying to get rid of any tension or like right hand bow contact with the string or anything else?
I like to have my kids look at the bow.
Mhm.
So focus there. And then also to sing in their heads while they're playing to sort of relax them and to take the pressure off a little bit. If you sing in your head while you're playing, you're going to remember a lot more things and you're likely to be more loyal to the phrasing or to things you've practiced.
Mm.
And then, so those two things in the moment. And then, of course, if anything goes wrong, you just pretend like it was right and that Mendelssohn wrote that. And then, to prepare, the only way we can prepare to perform or compete is to practice performing and competing.
Yeah.
So, those are the biggest things I would say is perform, 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 perform. And then when it's actually time to do it, let go, trust yourself, trust everything that you've done, look at your bow and listen and sing in your head.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because when I perform in auditions or competitions, sometimes I have trouble trying to like focus on just the music because sometimes when there's judges and it's an
Yeah.
in-person competition, like I can feel their stares on me, so it's just nerve-wracking.
Pretend always that they love you and that they are cheering for you.
Mm,
Also, one thing out there, if anyone is doing conservatory auditions, this is slightly more so, I think, in conservatory auditions, but also in regular competitions. The jury is always cheering for you. It does not feel like that, but the jury, the judges, they want you to be the best. They don't want you, they want to see your best you.
mm,
No jury is sitting there like, can't wait to see where chaos messes up on this G string part. They're not, no one is doing that. They're actually like, what is he saying? Or what's special about this violinist or this cellist or this pianist? And in conservatory auditions, especially, they are looking for potential and they are looking for sound and they are looking for like what makes you so special as a player. So if that helps your mindset a tiny bit, even if they look like they're really like that's whenever I adjudicate, I try to like be extra smiley, but they want you to be your best. They're not looking for mistakes. They're listening for to see you as a person and a performer. They're not listening for mistakes. So just kind of go out there and know that everyone in the room is actually cheering for you.
yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking your time to do this interview with me today. I
Of
really appreciate it.
course. Anytime.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you all so much for watching the video. We hope you guys learned some tips to apply to your own musical journey, whether you're a seasoned musician or just starting out. If you're interested in learning more about Mrs. Faidley and her teaching philosophies, you can check out our website at elizabethfaidley.com. With that, I hope you all have a great day and make sure to check back in on our channel for more musical content.